The setting, it was a warm August night, and Tony, a seasoned truck driver with over 2 decades on the road, found himself pushing the limits of exhaustion. He'd been driving for hours on end, the highway stretching out endlessly before him. His eyes, heavy with fatigue, caught sight of a faded sign in the distance. The last stop motel vacancy. It wasn't his first choice. The place looked like a relic from the past, its neon sign flickering erratically, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. But the next town was still miles away, and Tony knew he couldn't push on much longer without risking falling asleep at the wheel. Reluctantly, he decided to pull in. The motel's parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of rusty cars that looked like they hadn't been moved in years. The whole place had a stillness to it, as if time had forgotten this little pocket of the world. As Tony walked up to the office, he noticed the curtains in one of the windows shift, as if someone had been watching him. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he dismissed it as his imagination running wild due to fatigue. The encounter. Inside, the motel was no better. The lobby was dimly lit, the wallpaper peeling in corners, and the air smelled of stale cigarettes and something else he couldn't quite place. Behind the counter stood an old woman, her face wrinkled like a dried apple, with eyes that seemed too sharp, too aware. "Looking for a room?" she asked, her voice raspy and low. Tony nodded, barely holding back a yawn. The woman handed him a key with a tarnished number 7 on it. "Rooms around back. Last one on the left. Checkouts at dawn," she said, her eyes never leaving his face. As he turned to leave, she added, almost as an afterthought, "And don't mind the noises. The place is old, tends to creak at night." Tony nodded again, though the way she said it left him feeling uneasy. The night. His room was exactly what he expected. Small, dingy, and musty. The bed was lumpy, and the sheets had a slight yellow tint. But at that moment, Tony didn't care. All he wanted was a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. He double-checked the locks on the door, which seemed flimsy at best, then collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came quickly, but it was not peaceful. In his dreams, Tony found himself back on the highway, but the road never seemed to end. The sky was an ominous shade of red, and the trees on either side seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out as if trying to pull him off the road. He awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was pitch black, save for the sliver of moonlight creeping in through a gap in the curtains. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards above him. Remembering the old woman's words, Tony tried to brush it off, but then he heard something else, whispering. It was faint, almost like the sound of the wind, but the words were unmistakable. Someone, or something, was speaking just outside his door. Tony sat up, straining to hear, his body tensed with fear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were no longer just outside his door. They were inside the room. The revelation. Panicking, Tony fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand, but it wouldn't turn on. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, overlapping, rising in intensity. He could feel the air growing colder, the hair on his arms standing on end. Just then, the door to his room creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. Tony's breath hitched as he saw a figure standing in the doorway. A man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The man stepped forward, and Tony could see that his clothes were tattered, covered in dirt and something darker. Blood. The man's mouth moved, forming words that Tony couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. This was no ordinary motel guest. Tony scrambled off the bed, backing away as the figure advanced. His hand brushed against the Bible on the nightstand, and without thinking, he grabbed it, holding it out like a shield. The figure stopped, its eyes narrowing. Suddenly, the voices stopped, and the figure faded into the shadows, leaving Tony alone in the silence once more. The escape. Tony didn't wait to find out what would happen next. He grabbed his keys and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to check out. As he ran through the parking lot, he noticed that the old woman was standing in the office window, watching him with those same sharp eyes. He didn't stop until he was back in his truck, the engine roaring to life as he sped out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. It wasn't until he was miles away that he dared to look in the rearview mirror. The last stop motel was gone, as if it had never been there. To this day, Tony swears that the place was real, that what he experienced wasn't just a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But no matter how many times he's driven that stretch of road since, he's never found the motel again. And the whispers, those cold, eerie voices, they still haunt his dreams, reminding him that some stops are best left behind. In the heart of Arizona's desolate desert stretches, a highway known among truckers as Dead Man's Pass. It's not marked on any official maps, but the stories surrounding it are whispered at every roadside diner and rest stop from California to Texas. One such tale begins with a trucker named Jerry, a veteran of the road with over 2 decades of experience. Jerry was known for his meticulous nature. He logged every mile, every rest stop, and every strange occurrence in his weathered journal. But what happened on that hot August night was something he never expected. Jerry was on a tight schedule, transporting a load of industrial equipment from Los Angeles to Houston. The sun had set hours ago, and as he approached the seemingly endless stretch of Dead Man's Pass, the air turned thick, heavy with the heat and the weight of the silence. The only sound was the steady hum of his rig's engine and the occasional crackle of static from his CB radio. As midnight approached, fatigue began to settle in. Jerry noticed a small, dimly lit motel sign flickering in the distance. It was unusual. He had driven this route countless times and never seen it before. The sign read Desert Oasis Motel, and though his instincts told him to keep driving, the lure of a hot shower and a few hours of sleep was too tempting to resist. The motel was eerily empty. A single flickering light illuminated the gravel parking lot, and the neon sign buzzed faintly. Jerry parked his rig and headed inside, where a thin, elderly man with sunken eyes and a perpetual grimace greeted him at the front desk. "Room for the night?" the man rasped, his voice grating like sandpaper. "Yeah," Jerry replied, glancing around the dimly lit lobby. The decor was outdated, a relic of the 1960s, with faded floral wallpaper and a threadbare carpet that muffled his footsteps. "How much?" $30. "Cash only," the old man said, sliding a tarnished brass key across the counter. Jerry handed over the cash, took the key, and headed to his room, number 7, at the end of a long, narrow hallway. As he approached the door, a chill ran down his spine. The air grew colder, unnatural for a desert night, and he could swear he heard faint whispers coming from behind the walls. Shaking off the unease, Jerry unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small, with a single bed, a worn-out dresser, and an old television that looked like it hadn't been turned on in decades. The wallpaper was peeling, and the smell of mildew hung in the air. Exhausted, Jerry tossed his duffel bag onto the bed and headed to the bathroom. The faucet sputtered before releasing a stream of rust-colored water that eventually cleared. He splashed his face, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. As he dried his hands, he caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A shadowy figure standing behind him, just outside the bathroom door. He spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The door to the hallway was still closed, the lock bolted. "Get a grip, Jerry," he muttered to himself. "You're just tired." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just fatigue. Something was wrong with this place. Deciding he needed sleep more than answers, Jerry turned off the light and crawled into bed. He pulled the scratchy blanket over himself, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispers returned, louder now, as if they were right next to his ear. He bolted upright, sweat drenching his shirt. The room was pitch black, save for a sliver of moonlight creeping through the cracked blinds. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until they formed words. "Get out! While you can." Jerry's blood ran cold. He reached for the bedside lamp, but before he could turn it on, the bed shook violently, as if something was thrashing underneath it. He leaped out of bed, heart racing, and backed into the corner of the room. The bed stopped shaking, but the whispers continued, more insistent now. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Terrified, Jerry grabbed his duffel bag and bolted for the door. As he fumbled with the lock, he heard the old man's voice, but it was different now, deeper, more menacing. "Too late. You're already in." The door finally gave way, and Jerry sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back. He burst into the lobby, where the old man was no longer behind the desk. Instead, the room was filled with shadowy figures, their faces twisted in anguish, eyes hollow. Jerry didn't stop. He ran to his truck, jumped in, and floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as he sped away from the motel. The whispers followed him, growing fainter as the motel disappeared in his rearview mirror. He drove until dawn, not stopping until he reached a crowded truck stop miles away. His hands were still trembling as he parked the rig and slumped back in his seat. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was 6 hours 66 minutes a.m. Startled, he blinked and looked again. It read 6:06 a.m. Just my mind playing tricks, he thought, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He reached for his logbook to record the night's events, but when he opened it, his blood froze. Scrawled across the pages in thick, black ink were the words, "Welcome to the Desert Oasis Motel. Enjoy your stay." Jerry never returned to that stretch of highway again, and to this day, no one has been able to find any trace of the Desert Oasis Motel. The truckers who listened to his story, though, all agree on one thing. If you ever see a motel that wasn't there before, keep driving, because if you stop, you might never leave. Jake was a long-haul trucker who had seen it all. From coast to coast, he had driven through every kind of weather on every type of road. His life was one of solitude and long stretches of highway, punctuated by stops at greasy diners and cheap motels. But there was one night, one stop, that he could never forget. It was late October, and the air was crisp with the bite of an early winter. Jake had been on the road for over 12 hours, and fatigue was starting to creep into his bones. The road ahead was dark, lined with thick trees that seemed to close in on the highway. His headlights cut through the gloom, but the shadows seemed deeper than usual, almost alive. He was somewhere in the mountains, the kind of place where the radio signals died and the GPS struggled to keep up. He needed to find a place to rest, and soon. That's when he saw the sign, "Last Stop Motel Vacancy." The sign was old, its neon flickering weakly in the darkness. Jake pulled off the highway and into the gravel parking lot. The motel was small, just a single row of rooms with peeling paint and dim lights. It looked like it hadn't seen much business in years. He parked his rig near the edge of the lot and got out, stretching his tired muscles. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of gravel under his boots as he walked to the office. A single light burned in the window, and through the glass, Jake could see an old man sitting behind the counter. The man looked up as Jake entered, his eyes dull and uninterested. "Need a room?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah," Jake replied, "just for the night." The old man handed him a key, no questions asked. "Room 7, right at the end." Jake thanked him, paid in cash, and headed to his room. As he walked down the row of doors, he noticed something strange. The other rooms were dark, no signs of life, but more unsettling was the silence. No sounds of televisions, no murmurs of conversation, not even the hum of an air conditioner. It was as if the motel was a ghost town. He reached his room and unlocked the door. Inside, it was as shabby as he expected. A faded bedspread, a small TV on a dresser, and a musty smell that lingered in the air. But it was a bed, and that was all Jake cared about. He kicked off his boots, lay down on the bed, and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. The silence pressed in on him, making his ears ring. He felt uneasy, like something was wrong. He told himself it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on him, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then he heard it, a faint sound, like the creak of a floorboard. Jake sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, this time closer, just outside his door. His heart pounded in his chest as he slowly got out of bed and walked to the door. He listened, pressing his ear against the wood. Nothing. Just when he thought he had imagined it, there was a loud knock, followed by a whisper. "Jake!" Jake froze. How did they know his name? He didn't recognize the voice, but it sent a chill down his spine. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. Maybe it was just the old man from the office. But why would he be at his door in the middle of the night? The knock came again, louder this time. "Jake, let me in." Panic surged through him. Whoever was out there knew him, but he had no idea who or what they were. He grabbed the chair from the corner of the room and wedged it under the doorknob, backing away to the far side of the room. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the doorknob started to rattle, as if someone was trying to force it open. The whispers turned to muttering, angry and incoherent, but his name was clear, repeated over and over. Jake grabbed his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. No signal. He cursed under his breath, throwing the phone aside. The rattling grew more violent, the door shuddering as if it would burst open at any moment. In a desperate move, Jake ran to the window and looked out. His heart sank when he saw what waited for him outside. The parking lot was no longer empty. Lined up in the dark were old trucks, rusted and abandoned, with their doors hanging open. In each one, he saw shadowy figures watching him. He stumbled back from the window, realizing too late that this place wasn't just a rundown motel. It was a trap, a place where weary travelers checked in but never checked out. The door gave way with a loud crack, and Jake turned just in time to see it burst open. Standing in the doorway was a figure, its face hidden in the shadows. But Jake knew deep down that it wasn't human. He ran to the bathroom, locking himself inside. His breath came in ragged gasps as he heard the thing enter the room, its footsteps slow and deliberate. It started whispering again, his name repeated like a curse. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. Silence filled the room once more, thick and oppressive. Jake waited, his heart pounding in his ears. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. He couldn't tell anymore. Then, there was a sound, a low growl, coming from just outside the bathroom door. Without thinking, Jake threw open the bathroom window and crawled out, falling hard onto the gravel below. He didn't stop to look back as he sprinted to his truck, his breath fogging in the cold night air. He jumped into the cab, slamming the door shut, and started the engine. As he peeled out of the parking lot, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, as if it had been abandoned for years. Jake didn't stop driving until the sun rose, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he finally pulled over at a diner, he sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. But the only thing he knew for sure was that he would never, ever stop at a place like that again. And to this day, Jake warns every trucker he meets, beware of the last stop motel, because once you check in, you might never leave. This story blends elements of a creepy, supernatural horror experience with the isolation and vulnerability of a trucker on the road. The eerie atmosphere, mysterious whispers, and the transformation of the motel into a trap all contribute to the unsettling feeling that something is terribly wrong.